There are so many people that are disgruntled with their dating life and they're disorientated. It's like, I seem to be dating the same person over and over again, but it's a different face, different haircut, different kind of person. But really, it's not a different kind of person. It's the same. It's the same energetic. We're getting in the same patterns, the same arguments. I feel the same shame, the same fears come up, and I'm not changing anything. But we get disillusioned, right? And we think and believe, well, this relationship is different because the person looks different, but they're not behaving different, and we're not behaving differently in the relationship. And so for me, when you say, where's the first place to start? It's to start with self. Like, we're the common denominators in our lives. Now, what does that actually look like tangibly? The truth of it is, most of the time, especially when we're on our healing journey, at the beginning stages of our healing journey, or the beginning stage of our awakening journey. In other words, we're learning more about who we truly are in the world, right? We're learning more about our likes and dislikes in a more authentic and genuine way. When we're at that beginning stage, what does that look like? It's very difficult to see the forest through the trees. It's very difficult to make sense of our patterns that have been established and developed and very well curated from a young age. From during our formative years, when we started navigating our way through the world, seeing ourselves through other people, developing ideas around our self-worth, how we give and receive love. Do we feel safe in relationship with our primary caregivers, our parents, or whoever those primary caregivers are? It could be an auntie, could be a foster mother, or it could be an elder sibling, whatever it may be, right? And those experiences that we have impact how we give and receive love as adults. So we have to start with ourselves. And again, can't see the forest through the trees. It's really difficult to make sense of and to make meaning of, even though we're meaning-making machines, to make meaning of our behaviors and our patterns. So having a trusted, respected, revered source of inspiration and reflection, a counselor, a psychologist, a coach, a dear friend, a family member, a group that you're a part of, people that you trust, respect, and revere that can give you feedback into what you may not be able to see. And then from there, of course, awareness isn't the first and last step. Awareness is the first steps. Think of a ladder. You're climbing a ladder, and awareness is the first step. So if your goal is to get to the top of the ladder, not that growth and expansion is linear, but to simplify, let's just say that it is, right? Awakening or becoming more connected to self in a more genuine way, in a more loving way is linear. Then awareness are the first few rungs. And of course, interspersed on the climb, there'll be other awareness points, because as you break through, so you have an awareness, you take action on that new awareness, consistent action, you got to climb a few rungs, you then reach a new point of expansion, a new point of understanding self and being in the world, actually doing differently, and then new awareness comes. But awareness is always the first steps, it's always the first rung, right? So we have to then take action with that. Now, here's the interesting thing. To take action, we only need one simple thing, but it's not so simple. We need to feel safe. Simple to understand, somewhat, not simple to execute. We have to feel safe in our nervous systems. But sometimes the patterns that we develop from a young age, and I'll give you an example in a moment, they are so entrenched in our biology and physiology, in our nervous systems, in some of our most ancient nervous systems, such as our dorsal vagal nervous system that resides in the parasympathetic nervous system of the autonomic nervous system, like super old, like millions of years old, right? Which essentially is responsible for either feeling safe, like social cohesion and social engagement, or it's responsible for that paralysis that we feel, that immobilization, right? Like to basically, it's beyond fight or flight. The sympathetic nervous system is actually a little beyond that, a little newer than that, so to speak. But we're dealing with physiology that's entrenched within us. And so as a kid, if one of your parents was really violent, you maybe learned to hide. You developed a strategy of hiding, either physically hiding and or emotionally hiding, or maybe disassociating, your mind leaving your body because the violence was too intense. So when you're in a relationship as a 30-year-old woman, as an example, and your partner raises their voices or gets aggressive, you're automatically taken back. Your nervous system takes you back to that little time when you were a little girl and mum or dad were just screaming so much or being physically abusive, and you go straight to those old coping strategies that you once established and used that helped you get to being 30 years old. Without even thinking about it, the nervous system just automatically goes back there. And so we have to feel safe enough to make the changes. Now, how do we feel safe enough? I'm going to go back to people. When we surround ourselves with people that help us feel safe, with non-judgment and compassion, that aren't erratic in their movements, that are safe in their own nervous systems, the neuroception of our nervous system, which simply means the way that we unconsciously scan the environment to feel safe, that feeds information to our brains and says, I'm safe, right? That then feeds information into the rest of the body, hormonally, biologically, cellularly, etc. Says we're safe, psychologically. When you're surrounded with people that are safe, your social engagement system comes online. That's the rest and digest system. That is not, you're not in survival mode anymore. So there's this beautiful dance and interplay between physiology and psychology, individual and social psychology, and how that impacts our emotions. And so if you're with a partner that, let's just say, raises their voice because they're passionate or they're really upset, and then they're able to see that you're starting to retract, and they immediately apologize, because repair is really important. They immediately apologize and they change their body posture. They open themselves up. They move slower. They speak slower. They breathe a little deeper. They look at you in your eyes. They say, I'm sorry. All of a sudden, their nervous system becomes safe for you to be able to express yourself, to maybe share that that was not appropriate, or that really hurt, or that you got scared. And then you're able to repair back and forth, as opposed to both of you coming from wounding. I think I got on a tangent then. I'll stop just to make sure.
No, that was all great. I think you're totally channeling that for me. That was definitely one of the big things for me, of just going back into my same childhood patterns of, it got intense and I would shut down and lock myself in my room and hide. And then I was doing that in relationships as well. So I'm sure that's exactly why you brought that up. And I think the distinction you made there with the safety piece is so important, because I think an area where a lot of people struggle is confusing safety with familiarity.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. That was a big learning lesson for me. Like, what I was drawn to was because it was familiar. And then, 6 months later, oh, not familiar in the ways I want, right? So how do I switch what's familiar to me? I'm sure you see that coming up a lot for people.
Oh, most definitely. For myself, Christina, for myself, like all of us, I said earlier, we're meaning-making machines. We don't only attach meaning to our meaning or meaning to our experiences, but we also deem to be what is a repetitive experience familiar. And the interpretation of familiarity, or the meaning, the general meaning of familiarity is, well, if it's familiar, it's safe. There's an unconscious agreement within us that, well, if we're still here, we're breathing, we're living, we're doing our thing, we're living through the world, then at some level that familiarity is safe. Now, you may say, living in a concentration camp, for example, it's familiar day to day, day to day. That can't be safe. Well, at some level, it's not safe. But at another level, the unknown and the volatility is safe, because you can expect volatility and you can expect the unfamiliar. You can expect to wake up hungry. You can expect to maybe have some food, maybe not. You can expect to, maybe I'm going to be killed, maybe I'm not. The twistedness in that is that the psychology needs to hang on to something that is repeatable. And so we hang on to familiarity and we deem it to be safe, but it doesn't mean that it's healthy. It could be safe at some level, but it doesn't mean that it's healthy, because we've got these competing energies that are going on within us, within psychosocially, emotionally, psychologically, biologically, neurologically, and we're trying to make sense of it all. And sometimes the unhealthy patterns of being in an abusive relationship, or being a people pleaser, acquiescing, sacrificing oneself, low self-worth, those patterns you've learned somewhere, being the victim, somewhere in your, namely in our childhood, but also in our adolescence, somewhere in our lives, we've learned that tactic, that survival strategy, that coping strategy has got us attention, has got us love, has got us some level of affection, has had us being seen or witnessed or heard or appreciated, even, albeit just very, very small. But then we just go back into that pattern. We do more of the people pleasing. Or maybe your pattern is that if you've been coercive or manipulative or aggressive or oppressive or controlling, you've got what you wanted to feel safe in your body, because maybe you learned that behavior through watching the dynamics of your parents. So whatever those patterns are, if they're familiar to us, at some level they're safe and they're repeatable. And we think they're just going to keep working for us. But what they're doing is they're repeatable, all right? And they're giving us very similar experiences until we break the pattern. But we need to feel safe enough and confident enough in ourselves to break the pattern. And we do that by doing our inner work, by feeling feelings that have been unfelt and trapped in our bodies physiologically at the time of inception, right? So call it the abuse, call it the being bullied, call it the being teased, call it not feeling enough, but not knowing how to express that as a kid. And then moving that through the body to create spaciousness in our psychology to then be able to choose differently.